First, I just want to thank my co-author on this presentation, Mike Thomas. You've all heard a lot about him these last couple of days. He is retiring, and we'll certainly miss him when he's gone. I want to start with a little background information on the fish community in Lake St. Clair, because we're moving on to Lake St. Clair now, not talking about Lake Erie anymore, and the importance of that fish community. Lake St. Clair has a really diverse fish community. It's a mixture of warm water and cool water fish species. And more than 110 fish species live in or move through Lake St. Clair and its connecting waters, St. Clair River and Detroit River. And these areas provide spawning habitat and nursery habitat to more than 45 species of fish. Lake St. Clair is home to several species at risk, and many of these are listed as species at risk in both Ontario and Michigan. Some of these include channel darter, eastern sand darter, we just heard about lake sturgeon, and northern mad tom, pug-nosed minnow, pug-nosed shiner, and silver chub, and spotted gar. I want to talk a little bit about the background information on the assessment surveys that Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and Michigan Department of Natural Resources perform. And then I'll talk a bit about some species-specific information from those surveys specific to sport fish species. First up, the Michigan Spring Trap Net Index. Michigan DNR performs a trap netting index in the spring. It takes place from late April to late May to evaluate the adult fish community composition. Their survey started in 2002 and consists of 4 trap nets fished in Anchor Bay, which is shown on the map. These are the average catch rates from that survey over the time series of the survey. You can see that in recent years, the catch rates have declined from the peak in 2010, although in 2015 there was a slight increase, about 8% over the 2014 catch rate. However, the catch rate in 2015 remains below the long-term average. Common species caught in the survey include rock bass and channel catfish. Ontario also performs a fall trap net index to evaluate the adult fish community composition. This survey started back in 1974 at 3 different sites. The sites are shown in the figure. I'll be presenting information from 2 of those sites because the 3rd site, St. Luke's, was not fished through the entire time series. This is the average catch rates over time starting in 1974 on the Ontario Trap Net survey. As you can see, catch rates over the last 2 decades have been lower than they were in the 70s and 80s. And in 2015, the average catch rate was the lowest observed in the time series. Common species caught in this survey include freshwater drum and channel catfish. Michigan performs a trawling survey. It takes place in September, and it's used to assess the fish community composition and young of year abundance of yellow perch and smallmouth bass. The survey started in 1996 and consists of 3 to 10 trawling tows in Anchor Bay. Again, the area is shown on the map. This is the average community fish composition observed in the Michigan Trawling Index, and this is all ages combined, so adults and young of years. On average, majority of fish caught are minnows, but 70% of the catch are minnows, including spot-tail shiners, sand shiners, and emerald shiners. As well, there are some perches, yellow perch, log perch, walleye caught. In 2015, the community composition looked different than the long-term average. About 74% of the catch was perches. And this was not because they had a lot of extra perch caught in the survey, but rather that the minnows just didn't show up in the numbers that they normally see them. Ontario performs a young of year index as well. This is a nearshore seining survey. It's used to assess the nearshore fish community composition and the young of year abundance. The survey started in 1979, but because it wasn't fished every year and was fished at different sites from year to year, I'll be showing the data from 2007 to present when the survey was done consistently at the 8 sites shown on the figure. On average, over this time series, about 44% of the catch in the nearshore seining survey in Ontario waters consists of minnows, including spot-tail shiner, emerald shiners, and sand shiners, and others. 18% of the catch is gizzard shad, and 16% brook silversides. In 2015, the community composition was similar to the long-term average, with the exception of that we found more gizzard shad than the average. As well, we saw more perches. In this case, they were log perch that we saw in 2015. Neither Ontario nor Michigan performs an annual creel survey, but in 2015, we did a joint survey that was conducted by Michigan Department of Natural Resources and supported by Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and USGS. This was an aerial creel survey that had a plane counting the fishing effort along the length of the river, and creel crews were at the boat ramps to interview anglers about their catch. The survey took place from March 28th to October 25th in 2015. The survey only took place during the daytime, so it did not capture the nighttime fishery, and it did not capture the shoreline fishery. This is some of the results from our 2015 Binational Detroit River Creel Survey. There's a lot of numbers here, so I just want to draw your attention to the very last line right now. In 2015, there were over 620,000 angler hours of effort fished on Detroit River during the course of the survey. And most of it, 54% of that, took place in April and May. So that is very heavily weighted towards the spring fishery. Also, I just want to point out on the slide that the fish with the highest catch was white bass, with over 500,000 white bass caught. 44% of those were harvested, and the majority, 68% of them, were caught in May. And I'll get into some other specifics on this for some of our common sport fish species as I go through the talk. In the absence of an annual creel survey, we do have a volunteer sport diary program, and this is supported by both Ontario and Michigan. And in this survey, anglers volunteer to fill out a diary each time they go fishing to let us know about their catch rates and where they're fishing. The survey takes place on Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, and St. Clair River. In 2015, we had 50 participants in this program in the St. Clair system, and this was down from 57 in 2014. These anglers took a total of 800 fishing trips on the system, with over half of that in Lake St. Clair, and over 9,000 rod hours were fished. Now I'll talk about some of the common sport fish species: yellow perch, walleye, smallmouth bass, and muskie. Starting with yellow perch, which is a very popular sport fish, and it's fished in the summer and in the winter on Lake St. Clair. In our 2015 Detroit River Creel Survey, the catch of yellow perch was about 192,000 fish, and 38% of those were harvested. And 68% of that catch took place during September. Yellow perch were mainly targeted in the lower Detroit River. In our angler diary program, our diarist recorded 105 fishing trips targeting yellow perch in 2015. The figure shows the catch rates in the Lake St. Clair, which is the blue line, and Detroit River, which is the red line. For most years, the catch rate of yellow perch in the Detroit River was slightly higher than Lake St. Clair. Also on this figure, the purple triangle indicates the catch rate from the 2015 Detroit River Creel Survey. The catch rates between the Creel Survey and the Angler Diary Program are not directly comparable because of methodology, but I just wanted to put it on here to give it some overall context, and that's to say that in our Detroit River Creel Survey, the catch rate was about 4 yellow perch per angler hour, which was about equal to what we observed in our Detroit River Angler Diary Program. This is our catch rate of yellow perch in the Ontario Fall Trap Net. In 2015, the catch rate for yellow perch was the lowest observed in the time series, and it was a 73% decline from the 2014 catch rate. In the Ontario Nearshore Seining Survey, the largest young of year class that we observed in the course of the series was in 2009. And in 2015, the catch rate was only 4 yellow perch per 10 seine hauls, which was a 74% decline from the year before and the third lowest observed in this time series. In Michigan waters, the picture was quite different. In the Michigan September index trawls, the largest yellow perch year class they observed was in 2010. And in 2015, the survey caught 96 young of year yellow perch per 10-minute tow, which was one of the higher catch rates observed in their series. And I just want to point out that the red outline on this graph corresponds to the same time frame as the previous slide. Moving on to walleye, in our 2015 Detroit River Creel survey, the catch of walleye was about 156,000 fish, and 86% of those were harvested. 77% of the walleye catch occurred in April and May. And walleye was a very popular fish species to target, but 73% of the fishing parties targeted walleye. In our Angler Diary program, there were 557 fishing trips targeting walleye in 2015. And in the Detroit River, 92% of the effort in the diary program was directed towards walleye. The figure shows the catch rates of walleye in each water body in our Angler Diary program. The highest catch rates were in the St. Clair River. However, we don't have very many participants in the St. Clair River, so this is a low sample size. The next highest catch rates were observed in the Detroit River, followed by Lake St. Clair. In our Detroit River Creel survey in 2015, again shown by the purple triangle on this figure, the catch rates were about equal to actually our Lake St. Clair catch rates in the Detroit River Angler Diary program, which was about 0.36 walleye per unit of effort. This is the catch rate for walleye in the Michigan spring trap net fishery. In Michigan, the catch rate for walleye has been fairly consistent over time, and in 2015, the catch rate of 1.4 walleye per 24-hour lift was just slightly below the long-term average. This is the catch rate of walleye in the Ontario trap net survey, and again, the red outlined area corresponds to the same time frame as the Michigan survey we just saw. In the 70s and 80s, catch rates of walleye were much higher than observed in recent years, and in 2015, the catch rate of walleye was the lowest observed in the time series of this survey. For the last 3 years, Ontario MNRF has been performing a walleye tagging study on the Thames and Sydenham rivers. In 2013, we tagged almost 400 walleye in the Sydenham River, and since then 19 have been recaptured. In 2014, we tagged 253 walleye, and since then 12 have been recaptured. And in 2015, we tagged 340 walleye, and since then 20 have been recaptured. And these figures show the movements of the recaptured walleye. On the left are the fish that were tagged in the Sydenham River in 2013, and the yellow lines show where they moved from and where they were recaptured, mainly in Sydenham River and St. Clair Delta area. On the right are the walleye that were tagged in the Thames River, and they were recaptured in Detroit River, Lake St. Clair River, and as far away as Saginaw Bay. So it appears that, in this instance anyways, the walleye in the Thames River tend to move further than Sydenham River walleye. Moving on to smallmouth bass. In our 2015 Detroit River Creel survey, the catch of smallmouth bass was over 100,000 fish. The catch was divided with about 30% occurring in September and 22% in May. And there's a strong catch and release ethic for smallmouth bass, and 97% of these fish were released. Catch rates of smallmouth bass in our Angler Diary program have declined over the last couple of years, with a slight increase in the Detroit River catch rate in 2015. In the Michigan Spring Trap Net survey, catch rates of smallmouth bass have declined since the peak in 2010, with the current catch rate of about 2.3 smallmouth bass per 24-hour lift being below the long-term average of 4.5. This is the catch rate of smallmouth bass in our Ontario Fall Trap Net survey. In 2015, there was a slight increase in catch rate over the previous years, but a 58% increase. However, the catch rate of smallmouth bass remains below the long-term average in the Ontario survey. This is the catch rate of young of year smallmouth bass in our Ontario nearshore seine survey. In this survey, the largest year classes we've observed for smallmouth bass are in 2007, followed by another strong year class this year in 2015, when we saw 46 young of year smallmouth bass per 10 seine hauls, which is the second highest we observed. It was a different picture in Michigan waters, where the largest year class observed was in 2010. And in 2015, the catch rate of young of year smallmouth bass was low. It was only 2 age 0 smallmouth bass per acre. Michigan performs a smallmouth bass tagging study. Since 2002, they've tagged over 5,000 smallmouth bass in Anchor Bay, and 605 of those have been reported back. Thanks to this strong catch and release ethic for smallmouth bass, some of these fish have been recaptured multiple times. The black dots on the figure show the recapture locations of smallmouth bass, and you can see the recaptures are heavily clumped in the Anchor Bay area, so it seems like these fish don't move very far from home. In our Detroit River Creel survey, about 4,600 muskie were caught. In the survey, all of these were reported released, and muskie were mainly targeted in the upper portion of the Detroit River. This is the catch rate of muskie in the Michigan Spring Trap Net survey. For the past few years, catch rates of muskie in the survey have been low, and in 2015 was well below the long-term average. Again, we see a slightly different picture in Ontario waters, where catch rates of muskie have been fairly high for the last few years. There was a slight increase in catch rate in 2015. And catch rate in 2015 was above the long-term average. In 2015, Michigan DNR performed an electrofishing survey to look for young of year muskie. They had 9 electrofishing sites in the Anchor Bay area, and young of year muskie were caught at 7 of those locations. The highest catches were in areas of aquatic vegetation, and they had about 6.6 young of year muskie caught per hour of electrofishing. Michigan does hope to continue with this survey in the future. And lastly, I just want to mention some fishing regulation changes that are taking place in the Michigan waters of Lake St. Clair. In 2016, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources will be making the following changes to fishing regulations in Lake St. Clair and connecting waters. The first is a new catch and immediate release season for black bass, which is smallmouth bass and largemouth bass, that runs from January 1st to the possession open season in June. Previously, the season started in the last week of April, and this is a statewide change. Another statewide change will be individual daily creel limits for walleye, black bass, and northern pike, which were previously all regulated with a single combined creel limit. And the last change is a new increased 5-fish daily creel limit for northern pike, and this change will take place in the St. Clair Detroit River system only. Thanks for your time.